Hello everyone. Today we're going to be looking at a crit-based Prismatic Burst. Now this is a build I haven't seen too many people do. Normally it's a Ignite variant, but today we're going to be looking at a crit-based version that uses all three elements, and it's got about 10 million damage in the clear setup using Awakened Increased Area of Effect. It can do most bosses. Not sure about Uber versions. I don't know if my skill is lacking or if the build doesn't have enough DPS or the defenses are too weak, but for all non-Uber content it does really well. The build is a bit of a glass cannon. It only has about 28,000 effective health in PoE, but for what it lacks in defenses, it makes up for very instantaneous and immediate damage that just explodes packs, melts bosses, and is just a lot of fun to play. So I haven't seen too many people do this build before, so this is my take, trying to stack as many things as possible to get this build to crit hard and do big damage. So we're based on this support gem, Prismatic Burst, and it's pretty interesting because it's not an active skill. So any plus to gem levels, for example on your weapon, on your amulet, or through empower support, don't affect it at all. It's only through increasing support gems that it scales its flat damage. But while it may be kind of hard to scale, once you get above level 30, it starts to grow exponentially. And so I'll show you a graph of that here. And so what this means is we're going to be using a Forbidden Shako to get the highest level possible, so we can get the highest base damage possible. So how we're going to be scaling this is the gem, or the Shako rather, is going to provide a ton of flat damage through the gem level. And then the only other thing that we have left to scale is spell damage, elemental damage, crit damage. And then instead of cast speed, we're going to be scaling cooldown. And because you need a hit with an attack, we need to cap our accuracy, and we also need to align our attack rate to the trigger rate. Now on this level 21 version, which is the highest you can get normally, it's 0.8 seconds. But in my Shako, it's 0.31 seconds. And actually, when I use temporal chains, because I'm using a balance of terror to give me increased cooldown, that 0.31 seconds drops to 0.29, which is perfect because my Blade Flurry is 0.3 seconds. Now, Blade Flurry is what we're going to be using to trigger our Prismatic Burst. And the reason for that is it has a very nice area of effect. And I'll show you a clip here of just how far it can really reach. Yep. And the other really nice thing about Blade Flurry is you actually get 2 hits for 1. So first, when you're channeling like this, of course you're hitting the enemies, but then when you release, it has this pop around your character that also has another hit. So if you're just tapping like this, you're getting about 2 triggers. And so you can stutter step like this, and you can see how that secondary or release hit triggers. And the other really nice thing about Blade Flurry is you have Val Blade Flurry, which out of all the things that it does, when you're channeling, it doesn't actually hit enemies, it's only on release, but its hit can't be evaded. It gives you a powerful blind. It also makes you take 50% less damage while channeling, so it's a great button, just hit it and you'll take less damage, and then it'll kind of trigger a series of explosions around you or around the enemies that are hit. Right, so in my testing, Cyclone is nowhere near as good. It just has a tiny radius. Static Strike is a valid option, but you're playing a strike skill, and then if you don't invest in additional strikes, it just feels really bad to run and hit enemies. And then since we're using trigger bots, which I'll talk about more later, since we're using trigger bots, Static Strike just feels clumsy because the trigger bots are kind of trailing you, and so you're running into the enemies first and then triggering afterwards. So one of the main ways that we talk about scaling damage is through spell damage, elemental damage, crit, and crit multi. Divinarius Dagger is perfect for us because it gives us a bunch of spell damage, it gives us crit chance, it gives us crit multi, and that crit multi happens when we have killed recently, and so that's perfect for bossing. I've already talked about the Shako adding flat damage, so we don't really need to worry about adding flat damage to our skill because the Shako provides all of that for us. And so we have our crit multi, spell damage here. Our body armor gives us elemental penetration per Abyssal, and so we do some light Abyssal stacking so that we can get elemental penetration. We have it on our gloves, a socket, we have it on our belt, and we also have it on a couple places in our tree, I guess here and here. And the great thing about these Abyssals is they also give us cooldown reduction, and we can fit other stats that we need here. So like accuracy, like I already talked about before, being important, and various resists. And the other way that we're going to be scaling our damage is through some power charge stacking and frenzy charge stacking. So we're using Badge of the Brotherhood to get maximum frenzy charges equal to our maximum power charges. We're getting power charges through the tree, we're getting power charges through our amulet anointment, and we're getting power charges through tattoos. And so all these power charges also become frenzy charges. We also get maximum frenzy charges when we stand still, thanks to Relic Etches and Patience, and since we're channeling, we're standing still, so this is always happening when we attack. And then the final nice piece of this combo is this Timeless Jewel, Militant Faith. Make sure you get one that's converted by High Templar Dominus, because it gives us Inner Conviction, and so this works great because we get 3% more spell damage per power charge. Since we have 7 power charges, that's 21 more spell damage. And the downside of gaining power charges instead of frenzy charges is negated because we're not really gaining them. Our minimum frenzy charges is equal to our maximum, and so we still get the benefit of 4% more damage per frenzy charge by using this combo. So it's very powerful, just generic spell damage scaling that we're using here to get big damage boost. Alright, let's talk about our gem links. So to Blade Flurry, we have power charge on critical strike. This is super good. We have 7 power charges, very big damage boost. We also have increased critical strike support, so we can reach crit cap. We also have increased area of effect. The awakened version gives us more damage. Very, very good for mapping. I use this vast majority of the time. It feels very good. For uber pinnacle bosses and whatnot, you can swap conk effect, or increase critical damage if you want more area of effect, or inspiration is also valid depending on the socket colors that you want to roll, and if mana is an issue for your build. For mobility, we have Frostblink. Frostblink is perfect for this build because we can use it when we're channeling and when we're casting our temporal chains, and vulnerability, as I talked about earlier. Increased area of effect and Bone Chill, that just gives us better coverage so that when enemies stand on this, they get Bone Chilled. It's pretty noticeable on bosses when we have this up. And this 4-link doesn't really do too much for us, and like Hydrosphere in PoE, it's like maybe 5% damage, not super noticeable, plus bosses aren't going to be next to it all that often. We have Void Sphere for Toda memes, increased duration, increased area of effect. Increased duration is kind of nice for Shade Form, whenever that triggers. In our other weapon, we have Assassin's Mark and Mark on Hit. Very important, best mark that we can use. For auras, I'm running Zealotry, Precision, and Grace. You can get Empower or Enlighten if you want. I choose not to, just keep it budget. But yeah, that's the main links. There is a lot of flexibility. Like I have Chaos and Death and Portal here. I don't even have a guard skill. I just don't bother. So a lot of flexibility, especially since a lot of these can be swapped out. Like this is probably our core setup here, these two items along with our auras and Mark on Hit. And you have and I guess these Balanced Terror, so you probably have 4-6 sockets that you could play around with if you want to put other things in there. Alright, so let's take a look at the skill tree, starting with the Ascendancy. So we're a Saboteur, and that's probably the perfect Ascendancy for Prismatic Burst because of these two nodes right here, Trigger Bots and like Clockwork, or Perfect Crime. So through Trigger Bots, Prismatic Burst triggers twice. It deals a little bit less damage, but we don't get the downside of mana cost like you normally would with other triggered skills because Prismatic Burst doesn't have any mana cost to it. So this is perfect. And increased cooldown recovery rate. This is a pretty rare stat in Path of Exile, so being able to get it on our tree is a big boost. The other nice damage node here is Explosives Expert. We are triple element, and so we get the full benefit of this node, and in Path of Building that's like something like 20% damage overall that it adds us when we tick this. Now these last two nodes you can play around with, Bomb Specialist or Born in the Shadows. I was playing with Born in the Shadows for a long time. Try not to die as much in maps. Even with this node I was still getting 65% shock on Maven. The other nice thing about Blind is if you're not accuracy capped, blinding enemies can be very helpful to get that accuracy cap because they won't be able to evade your attacks. But with Bomb Specialist, just the big damage boost is noticeable, and there is a slight defense perk to it as well. That 20% chance to take 50% less area damage from hits. We combo that with our Pantheon, so that's like 40% chance, which is pretty nice. And when this Bomb Specialist chance procs at the same time as the double damage from our Balance of Terror when we cast Vulnerability, the damage just gets insane. And so for the tree, we are just the generic elemental caster that crits, nothing too crazy. We pick up as many power charges as we can in the tree, and we tattoo it here. We get the crit nodes, we get life, we get elemental damage. Some things to point out. Wind Dancer is kind of nice, so we don't get one shot as much since we are stacking accuracy, and I needed to travel down here anyways to get this tattoo. Get some accuracy where you can, if you're not accuracy capped. This Elemental Mastery is pretty massive. It's like 12% damage or something in Path of Building. Defense-wise, we're not spell suppression capped. We're at 50%. If we look at our defenses, but making this lucky, our chance to suppress rolls twice, so in practice that's like 66% or something. The other nice thing about this tree is these lightning nodes here. So they just give us generic crit multi, and also 65% shock, very good. Power charge cluster here, very good, along with this mastery. Since when we stand still, we have 7 power, 7 frenzy, and 3 endurance charges. That's the big flat damage or increased damage boost here. We're trying to pick up sockets wherever we can on the tree. When you're starting out, this is a pretty big damage boost, but as you get better gear, the tattoos and the defense perks of them, like being crit immune, is very nice. If you're okay with your chaos resistance, you can not take this, but we are pathing by, and for a while I was spec into this, and it also you can get corrupting blood immunity. Very, very nice. AoE, pretty important for the feel good of the build, so pretty worth to take these 3 points. And then more recently, I got this Cold Mastery and this Cold Winter's Embrace node here that increases the duration of freeze, which just feels really good, improves survivability, and pairs well with this Mastery, where enemies take increased damage. Mind you, this is generic damage, not just cold damage, for each second that they've been frozen. And so this is great on bosses, especially pinnacle bosses, where even though their action speed can't be reduced by below a certain threshold, they still count as frozen, and we get this damage bonus. Talked about the weapons, we talked about the helmet, talked about amulet and boots. Next is the gloves. So gloves, you just want an Abyss Rule. You try and get one with a fractured mod that you want, and using fossils, using a hollowed fossil, you can roll an Abyss Rule and try and get some life on there, or whatever else you might be needing. The belt, get some increased cooldown recovery on a belt. Get one with all elemental resistances, because we are using a lot of uniques. We do struggle a little bit to be elemental resistance capped. So both of these are influence mods and suffixes specifically, and so you can awaken or orb them together and hope that you get a life roll or an increased life roll, especially if you have a Elder Belt, which can roll increased life. And I didn't get that here, and I was hoping to harvest reroll life with suffixes can't be changed, but getting any sort of good life roll was really hard, and so I went with the Veiled Chaos Orb, and you can actually block, I think it's evasion and armor, and then that pretty much guarantees life to roll. Our rings, we just fill our resistances and any random stats that we need, like strength here. This ring's pretty garbage, but it gets the job done. This ring, decent, especially with catalysts. And yeah, that's pretty much the gear. Flasks, this build is not min-maxed, it's mids-maxed, and so a lot of my immunities come from flasks, and I'm okay with that just for how the build is, but we could easily get ailment immune by getting a chance to avoid shock here, and then there is a jewel that you can socket that makes you immune to elements based on your chance to avoid elements is the same as lightning. So you can become ailment immune pretty easily, especially that we have like a bunch of 6 Abyss Jewels in our build. You can easily hit that 100% avoid lightning threshold, but I don't do that. You can also get a corrupting blood immunity, corruption on your Abyss Rule, but again, I don't do that. This build is mids maxed. So yeah, just flasks. You can probably do better. This is just what I have. So yeah, as we're watching this fight, this is pretty typical. I try to buff it up as much as I can, this invitation for max loot. This fight is a lot about dodging a lot of the one-shot mechanics that can happen because of this build. Can be a little bit squishy. You do pretty big damage and burst things down quickly. It's a lot of fun to see Conqueror's health drop, especially when builds that I've made before haven't done this. And this is a pretty unique skill that, again, I haven't seen too many people take on, especially the hit route. Usually they go ignite, so having just pretty instantaneous big damage is super satisfying. And yeah, sometimes you die, and that's okay. Get to whatever level you want to get to, and then just enjoy the damage and try not to get frustrated with deaths. That's what Cast on Death is for. Cast on Death Portal. So yeah, I hope you do try it out. It's a very fun build. You do need the Shako, which can be hard to get, but it's a lot of fun. And thanks for tuning in, and hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you.